5 months ago, while going about my daily routine of reading financial news and seeing what's going on in the world, I started to realize that something somewhere was brewing, something sinister, and the signs were starting to spill out into the news cycle. So I started looking in a little bit deeper, and what I found shocked me to my core. I noticed that all over the world, people were starting to prepare for an event that would threaten the state of the US dollar as the world's reserve currency. I saw companies like Palantir stock up on millions of dollars of physical gold bars. I saw a shift in the behaviors of people all over the world, but particularly in the East as they started buying up and hoarding gold. And finally, I saw countries that typically don't align themselves with the United States or the rest of the West for that matter buy billions of dollars worth of gold as well. It seemed obvious to me at the time that these people, companies and countries were preparing for something. The only problem was that I didn't know what they were preparing for. Now, I dubbed it a Black Swan event, to many people's dismay, because the literal definition of that sort of event is one that cannot be predicted. I decided to write a script for a video and to publish it here on YouTube so everyone else could see what was happening too, and it got a pretty strong response for a channel of my size. But within a week or so, everything had returned to normal, and I can almost guarantee that the vast majority of people who watched that video had forgotten about it within no time. Now, to be perfectly honest, I sort of forgot about it as well. I've spent the last 3 months really focusing on the dire state of inflation in the US and Europe and the inevitable monetary tightening that will come as a result of that. Away went 2021 then, and in came 2022, and things started to change. Russia began building up military forces on the border of Ukraine. They claimed it was nothing to worry about, that it was just simple repositioning of forces and some small military exercises, but satellite imagery said otherwise. Russia wasn't just sending a few thousand troops westwards, they were sending everything. They built command posts, field hospitals and logistical hubs, and the West started to warn us all of an impending invasion. Then Russia and Belarus announced their largest ever joint training exercises to happen right on the Ukrainian border, and so more troops, more equipment and more supplies began to flow as well. The truth is here, I don't know why I didn't see what was coming. I had literally spent hundreds of hours reading about Russia's preparation for an event that could change our world order, and yet when British and American intelligence reported that an invasion was planned, I, like almost everyone else in the West, shrugged this off as posturing by our governments and little more. But as we now know, we were all wrong. Russia was planning an invasion, and we know for a fact that certain other countries, like China, knew about it in advance. Russia was literally waiting for the Winter Olympics to end before invading as a precious little gift to the Communist Party. As the fighting kicked off, as did the sanctions from the West, and suddenly everything became abundantly clear. These people, they were preparing for the de-dollarization of their economies. They were preparing for their airline industries to be cut off from the rest of the world. They were preparing for war between the West and the East. Today, I'm going to go in depth and explain everything I saw before the invasion that now, in hindsight, seems so blindingly obvious to be a warning signal. I'm going to recap what I said almost 6 months ago and relate it to what we now know about this war and the new world order that started with the invasion of Ukraine, and as of yet, there just isn't an end in sight. Now, if you're worried about inflation and thinking about diversifying your portfolio with gold, Vaulted is the best way for individual or even institutional investors to acquire physical gold with a great website and mobile app that makes it easier than ever before. They store and insure their gold in the Royal Canadian Mint. It's all real one-to-one allocated gold manufactured by the Royal Canadian Mint and certified as conflict-free, meaning that you can rest easy in the knowledge that you can request instant physical delivery of your gold whenever or wherever you desire. Their prices are the best in the market too, because they store all their gold at the manufacturer and they cut out all unnecessary middlemen. They don't charge any premium or spread when buying or selling you gold, and they are as transparent as possible, meaning there are absolutely no hidden fees. On top of all that, they even managed to put out some great articles to keep you updated on the investing world. Now, if that sounds at all interesting to you, if diversifying your portfolio is important to you, with inflation and the markets being as crazy as they are right now, then I highly suggest you check Vaulted out. There's a link for you down below in the description and in the comment section for you to check out. So it all started with Palantir, a company literally named after a portal into the all-seeing eye of Sauron, which saw something coming in advance as well. Back in 2021, the company was flying high. It had IPO'd to much fanfare and built a cult-like base of investors who were sure the company would grow into one of the largest in the world. The concept behind the company is simple: revolutionize data, gather and analyze it on a greater scale, more efficiently and accurately than anyone else, and the really important part, sell that information to the CIA, the US military, and any other big deep state organization that has the cash to spare. It's hardly a surprise then that when Palantir, out of absolutely nowhere, bought $50 million worth of physical gold bars, a few of us started to talk about it. This was around the same time as Tesla and a few other companies started adding Bitcoin to their balance sheets as well, so it was really off-brand for a high-flying super growth tech company. Now, no one really knew what was going on inside their heads, but we had a few ideas. Firstly, Palantir bought real physically allocated gold bars, not an ETF of gold, not any kind of gold future or artificial exposure to the precious metal, but the real thing. This alone pushes forward the idea that Palantir was worried about what is to come and that they want absolute security, the kind that only gold can provide. Now, at the same time as Palantir bought up gold, a natural inflation hedge, the company also paid off huge amounts of debt, which is more in line with a deflation hedge. Now, why would a company work to defend itself against two things which are literally polar opposites of each other at literally the same time? Well, maybe because that company is predicting changing times, crazy events, and they know things are going to change and get far, far worse. They just didn't know in which direction they would move. Perhaps Palantir were preparing for some kind of black swan event. Now, when this sort of news comes from a quack on some fringe website, it's usually not too unreasonable to mostly ignore what's being said. But when it's coming from a company that makes billions of dollars supplying intelligence to the CIA, maybe it's just a little bit prudent to pay attention. Next, we saw individuals and sovereign nations all over the world begin to buy up gold as well, and we're not talking about small countries, and we're not talking about a small amount either. The central banks behind China and India started buying up gold and reducing their reliance on the US dollar, but on other Western currencies like the euro as well. Now, this isn't terribly surprising. These countries have been finding their feet over recent decades, and increasingly, they've been orienting themselves away from the West. Go back 10 years or so, relations between the West and China were actually rather strong, with people like David Cameron, who was at that point in time the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, inviting Xi Jinping on a trip to the UK and hailing a new era of golden relations between the two countries. As news of forced labour and genocide has emerged from Xinjiang though, and as personal liberties are stripped away daily by the CCP in Hong Kong, it's become clear that China is no friend, and China is well aware of that too. India isn't quite so clear-cut, and it's not really apparent whether that country will devolve into authoritarianism or liberalise into full-fledged democracy. But India is firmly of the belief that it should be able to craft its own future, and that means de-dollarising its economy as well to ensure that should sanctions come from the West, India is able to weather them and continue marching forward. We saw a similar thing happen with Serbia, a country that feels far closer to Russia than the EU, despite the fact that it isn't. During the COVID pandemic, for example, Serbia was one of the only European countries to go out of its way to buy the Sputnik vaccines designed and made in Russia. It might not surprise to hear you then that Serbia was also stocking up on gold and cutting down on dollars. But this wasn't something just reserved to the governments of these countries. We saw very similar things happen amongst the populations themselves. In China, for example, gold has been in such ridiculously high demand that Chinese citizens have been buying gold at $50 above spot prices, something which would damn near make a Western investor cry at seeing. Finally, the really big indicator that something huge was coming, and it came right from the horse's mouth, from the Russian state itself. In Russia, for the first time in decades, at the end of 2021, the central bank was holding more gold than it was US dollars after going on a consistent gold buying spree that has lasted for years. According to Putin himself, this was part of a broader strategy to de-dollarize the Russian economy and lower its vulnerability to sanctions as relations deteriorated. Over the course of a few years, and starting unsurprisingly enough in the early 2010s, Russia became the world's largest single buyer of gold, slowly building up a war chest that it intended to use to further its interests. This process started back in 2008 with the Russian invasion of Georgia, or perhaps even earlier. It continued in 2014 when Russia annexed Crimea and started a separatist war in the east of Ukraine. Finally, it came to a tipping point just over a month ago when Russia invaded the rest of Ukraine, starting a war that has already killed tens of thousands and displaced millions. What Russia knew was coming, though, was a mountain of sanctions, with the charge led, of course, by the United States, and the severity of those sanctions dependent on the reliance of the Russian economy on the US dollar. Russia's build-up of gold has been in preparation for this plan that is quite literally decades in the making. We have evidence suggesting that Russia even delayed their invasion of Ukraine in order to appease their Chinese allies so that news of this brand new war wouldn't taint the Winter Olympics that China was so determined to make a success. Is it so far-fetched to assume that maybe China had been stocking up on gold for the same reason, also abundantly aware of just how influential the US economy is, and the impact that could have on the rest of China when the US decides to play their cards? It really does pay to pay attention. I'm not claiming that it's easy to see what's happening, and I'm not claiming that I had a vision 6 months ago that came out to be perfectly true. But the warning signs were there, the realities were there, and they were public knowledge for everyone, you and I, and we all had the ability to connect the dots and protect ourselves and our financial futures. The reality is, we won't get it right every time, but we don't actually need to. We just need to be right once, and then we're already a leg up on those who drift along as the world moves at light speed above them, completely clueless as to the realities behind the scenes. Finally, I'd like to say a very special thank you to Volted for sponsoring this video and for giving us all such an easy and cost-efficient way to invest in gold. If you enjoyed this video, then make sure to like, comment, and subscribe to bless the YouTube algorithm. If you want more content like this, then check out our Patreon and join our community of investors. You get access to our Discord, loads of exclusive content like insight into my portfolio and buy and sell alerts for all my own investments. There's a link in the description to masterworks.io, a site that can help you protect your portfolio against inflation through fractional shares of art from world-famous artists like Banksy. Art has historically proven to be uncorrelated to the markets, so it's a really valuable resource with the markets on the brink as they are. It's completely free to sign up, so make sure to check it out. There's also a link in the description to BlockFi, which will give you up to $250 in free Bitcoin when you use it. You can also get over 7% interest on stablecoins to protect your hard-earned cash from being eaten away by inflation. Thank you all for watching, stay stoic, until next time.